Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into something that is incredibly profound and honestly really misunderstood. We're unpacking the anatomy of a hidden wound. Specifically, we're demystifying covert emotional abuse. If you've ever found yourself in a relationship where, nothing was overtly or physically wrong, but you still walked away completely doubting your own reality, well, this explainer is absolutely for you. We're going to look at the hard science and the clinical psychology behind why these dynamics are just so incredibly confusing, and much more importantly, how you can actually heal from them.
So let's kick things off with a huge question, one that haunts so many survivors. Why is it so incredibly hard to leave a relationship that literally hurts you? It's a question that carries so much heavy internalized shame, right? What we actually see in the clinical data is that incredibly capable, high-achieving people, we're talking surgeons, executives, leaders, they'll often sit in therapy and just completely blame themselves. They think, I'm smart, I'm successful, why couldn't I just walk away? But as we're about to see, staying in that dynamic, it is absolutely not a failure of intelligence or willpower.
To really get why leaving feels impossible, we have to talk about trauma bonding. A trauma bond is this incredibly powerful emotional attachment that develops between a survivor and an abuser. And it happens through a very specific cycle of intermittent harm and kindness. So here's the absolute crucial takeaway. Your inability to leave is a neurological and physiological response. It is not a character flaw. It's literally just your nervous system reacting exactly how it was conditioned to react. It lives in your body, not in your logic. Just knowing someone is bad for you doesn't magically switch off a trauma bond. All right, moving into section 1, the invisible trap. Let's explore exactly why capable people stay. There's this massive cultural myth out there that only weak or passive people end up in abusive relationships. But the research shows that is entirely false. Let's break down what's called the competence trap. The reality is, driven individuals often use what psychologists call the fawn response to survive. Fawning basically means you manage a threat by appeasing and people-pleasing. Think about it. In a professional setting, reading a room, managing other people's emotions, and de-escalating conflict, that looks like brilliant emotional intelligence. But inside a toxic relationship, that exact same brilliant survival strategy is exactly what keeps you stuck. You end up applying your incredible problem-solving skills to try and fix the relationship, working harder and harder to appease the threat. So how exactly does that bond get literally wired into your brain?
Let's dig into that in section 2, Science of the Trauma Bond, the neurological trap.
This brings us to a foundational concept in psychology called intermittent reinforcement. This is a conditioning pattern that delivers unpredictable rewards, like suddenly you get this intense warmth or validation, but it's mixed in with periods of total coldness or cruelty. And here's why this is a total game changer to understand. That unpredictable hot and cold cycle acts exactly like a gambling addiction for your nervous system. Research shows this is literally the single most powerful mechanism for creating and sustaining human attachment. Because you can't predict when that warmth is going to come back, you just keep trying. Your brain learns to hope, and that hope keeps you completely locked in.
And this intermittent reinforcement, it's methodically applied through 6 critical stages of trauma bonding. It almost always starts with step 1, love bombing, where you are just showered with overwhelming intensity and adoration. That rapidly builds step 2, trust and dependency. But once that bond is formed, boom, we hit step 3, criticism and gaslighting. The warmth vanishes, and suddenly your reality is being manipulated. That leads directly to step 4, resigning to control, where you just conform to avoid the conflict. By step 5, you experience a complete loss of self. And finally, step 6, addiction. You are literally addicted to the highs and lows, desperately chasing that very first love bombing phase. It's a highly structured roadmap of a psychological trap.
Which brings us to section 3, the body's hidden toll. Let's look at the physiological impacts. Because here's the thing, this kind of covert abuse doesn't just mess with your thoughts, it fundamentally alters your physiology. We're talking identity erosion, nervous system dysregulation, and emotional flashbacks. Chronic gaslighting actually changes the way your brain processes information about yourself. You literally lose trust in your own memories. Plus, all that unpredictability leaves your nervous system in a state of perpetual hypervigilance. Even when you're physically perfectly safe, your body is still bracing for the next threat. And that leads to emotional flashbacks, these sudden, visceral regressions into intense shame or fear, triggered by something as tiny as just a shift in someone's tone of voice. And if you do manage to physically leave the relationship, you get hit with this narcissistic withdrawal symptoms. It is so absolutely crucial that we validate this pain. Withdrawing from an abusive, intermittent reinforcement dynamic triggers intense physical symptoms. We're talking profound sadness, extreme rage that often disguises itself as depression, severe insomnia, nightmares, and even somatic physical pain and immune suppression. Leaving this kind of relationship is clinically likened to quitting an addictive substance cold turkey. Your body is going through legitimate physical withdrawal.
But there is hope. Let's look at Section 4, Rewiring the Nervous System, and explore some clinical solutions.
You really don't have to stay stuck in that withdrawal or that dysregulation forever. Healing is entirely possible, but it does require the right tools. First and foremost, clinical treatments and intimate partner violence safety screenings require professional support. Real recovery isn't just about reading a few self-help books, right? It requires targeted intervention. Tools like the Danger Assessment are widely validated instruments that professionals use to determine risk levels and help survivors build actionable, immediate safety plans. Establishing actual physical and psychological safety is the absolute prerequisite before any of that deep neurological rewiring can even begin. Once that safety is established, then we look to trauma-informed therapies. Honestly, traditional talk therapy often just isn't enough here because it only hits the cognitive surface. Trauma-formed therapies like specific trauma-focused CBT, STAIR for emotional regulation, IPT, and body-based modalities like EMDR and somatic experiencing, these work directly on regulating your nervous system. They actually help your brain process traumatic memories that got frozen in their original emotional state, basically giving your body safe experiences so it can finally let its guard down. Now, the recovery journey itself is pretty nonlinear, but it absolutely has a structure. Clinical experts outline these 5 stages of recovery. It starts with recognition, just naming the abuse for what it really is. Then comes separation, creating physical or psychological distance. Step 3 is stabilization, which is all about regulating your nervous system's chronic activation. Only after that can you safely move to Step 4, processing the deeper trauma. And finally, the best part, Step 5, reconstruction, rebuilding your identity, your self-trust, and moving from just surviving to actively thriving. And that leads us to our final part today, Section 5, reclaiming your authentic self, healing with IFS. This is really the ultimate goal of our explainer today, moving past the cold mechanics of the abuse and into the deep inner resolution of your own identity. And a great way to do this is through internal family systems, or IFS therapy. The core compassionate philosophy of IFS is incredibly simple. You are not your trauma. IFS suggests that trauma creates these fragmented parts of ourselves, parts that carry the pain and parts that protect us by numbing out or maybe overachieving. But beneath all those protective layers, there is a calm, centered core self that literally cannot be damaged by abuse. That core self is defined by what IFS calls the 8 C's of self-leadership: calm, compassionate, courageous, connected, curious, clear, confident, and creative. By cultivating these 8 qualities, your core self can step in and gently heal those wounded, traumatized parts of you, the parts that are still holding all that shame and fear. And the real beauty of this approach? It's gentle. It doesn't force you to relive the trauma just to heal from it. It simply asks you to lead your internal world with compassion. And this brings us to what I think is one of the most powerful reframes in all of trauma recovery. Your survival strategy was brilliant, and it is now costing you. This is the whole both-and concept. You've got to release yourself from that self-blame. The fawning, the hypervigilance, the overfunctioning, those were brilliant adaptations to a genuinely threatening environment. They kept you safe. You can honor those survival instincts for keeping you alive, and you can recognize that dragging them into your present life is completely exhausting and costing you your peace. Both are true. So, I want to leave you with this. What is the very first step you can take today toward radical self-compassion? Healing from covert abuse and trauma bonding, it doesn't happen overnight, and it definitely doesn't happen just by sheer willpower. It happens through understanding the actual science of your own nervous system, dropping that heavy weight of self-judgment, and taking one definitive, compassionate step toward your own recovery.